Good, thank you.
Oh, Bob Osbach is here, too.
You have been. Welcome back. I'll check in with you.
I think we were all, coming in and out because there was so much to do. And I'm actually.
First, I know what you say.
Go out and tell your story. Let it echo far and wide. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. How justice was our battle, and how justice was denied. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And say to those who blame us for the way we chose to fight, that sometimes our battles that are more than black and white. And I would not put down my sword when justice was my right. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. Go out and tell your stories to your daughters and your sons. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And tell them of our struggles. We were not the only ones. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. Your source can be a sermon or the power of the pen. Teach everyone to raise their voice, and then my family then. Will justice be demanded by 10 million citizens? Make them hear you. When they hear you, I'll be near you again. Thank you so very much for being here to commemorate this interfaith prayer vigil for Race Amity Day. In 2015, Governor Baker declared that the second Sunday in June as Race Amity Day, which is a day set apart to acknowledge in our Commonwealth is comprised of a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial citizens, and to encourage friendship, collegiality, civility, respect, and kindness as the commonly shared ideas. Some years ago, I had a chance to go to a lecture, and one of the lecturers, he said something that I never left me. He said that this construct of race is just that, a construct. And that our DNA, our life-building blocks are 99% the same. And that never, ever left me. Today's Interfaith Prayer Vigil represents the joining of prayers across several Metro West communities to publicly commemorate Race Amity Day in Natick. Tonight we join with communities across Massachusetts and the United States as we reflect on the beauty and richness of the diverse peoples of our nation, while reaching out with a spirit of amity or deep friendship towards one another, particularly those who may be different from ourselves. We wish to acknowledge the town of Natick for giving us this beautiful space. Thank you, God, for this beautiful weather. And interesting enough, we wish to thank the Nipmuc tribe, the local Indians, the local praying Indians who founded this place, and which is one of the reasons we are here today. Whatever your faith, your spiritual traditions, even those without any particularly faith affiliations to participate, in whatever way you feel moved, so be it. You are here, you are respected, you are loved, you are cherished. You have the program with us. We will start the program with an opening song, Make Me the Channel of Your Peace. Make me a channel of your peace. Where is fair life, let there bring home. Where there is darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy. Introduce the Reverend Lloyd of Greater Framingham Community Church, who will lead us in our opening prayer.
And good evening. My tradition, good evening, and y'all talk back to me. Good evening. Amen. It is so good to be here on this night, this place, this time. Won't you pray with me? Most gracious God, Lord God Almighty, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, and Jacob, the God of Sarah, Rachel, Hagar, Rebecca. We come tonight in this gathered sacred place. We ask not that your presence might be here, but we know already that you are here. We pray that indeed you might, through this here prayer vigil, bring healing of relationships, restoration of relationships, deliverance from toxic relationships, and that we might celebrate you by looking into each other's face and indeed seeing your image stamped on us. May we do an introspection first, that we might examine who we are, that in turn we might be outreached in discovering who everyone else is. For we prayed in your name, and everybody said, Amen. Amen. Thank you.
I am so very excited to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. We have the high honor of having with us today the Dr. Layli Mapayan, whose background includes being a member of the Baha'i faith community, as well as the executive director of the Wellesley Center for Women and a professor of the Africana Studies at Wellesley College. She is widely considered to be an expert on the womanist worldview and active methodology, particularly with her groundbreaking text in the fields of the womanist studies, the womanist reader, and the womanist idea. We are greatly humbled to have her joining us today. Dr. Mapayan.
Thank you so much, Ron, and I want to thank the beautiful singers and musicians that we had that gave us such an inspiring opening to tonight's event. And I also, of course, want to thank Reverend Dr. Lloyd for his opening prayer. 139 years ago, in 1882, Baha'u'llah, founder of the Baha'i Faith, made a bold assertion when he wrote, "The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." Implicit in this statement was the foundational idea that all people, all the kindreds of the earth, all the diverse populations from different nations and cultures and races are equal. Baha'u'llah understood all human beings as children of a common God, equally noble at birth and equally deserving of dignity and consideration throughout life. At the time he penned these words, this was a revolutionary statement because human inequality, particularly racial inequality, was still taken for granted. In 1912, just a few years before World War I, Abdu'l-Baha, the eldest son and appointed successor of Baha'u'llah, visited North America. He had come to share his father's message of world peace and the oneness of humankind. He found many who were receptive to this message, and yet he was struck by the stark racial inequality, racial hatred, and racial violence that he observed in an otherwise outstanding nation. On his tour of the United States, he began talking about race amity and began strongly encouraging those who embraced his father's message, the Baha'i message, to work towards racial amity, racial harmony, racial unity, and racial equality. Race amity means racial friendship, interracial friendship, people of different races being friends. Friendship is a quality of the heart. It is the heartfelt affection between two people towards one another. I like you, you like me, we are friends. It is perhaps the least complicated way that two people can relate. It doesn't require that I agree with everything you think or believe, or that you agree with everything that I think or believe. It doesn't require that I meet everything on your ultimate human being checklist, or that you meet everything on my ultimate human being checklist. It just means I see you, I like you, let's be friends. At the time Abdu'l-Baha visited America in 1912, there was very little of that. Most white people only knew black people as household servants or workers, and most black people only knew white people as employers or as enforcers of their lack of freedom to move about. It was the Jim Crow era, and segregation was enforced by law and custom. Both black and white communities had a rich community life of their own, but there was no bridge between them other than that created by the friction of racism. Abdu'l-Baha observed this as an outsider and found the situation heartbreaking and deplorable. So he set out to do something about it. One of the first things he did was to bring white and black people together in meetings. There's a famous story about Abdu'l-Baha being invited to a high society luncheon in Washington, D.C., at which he was to be the guest of honor. The luncheon was hosted by a diplomat for a group of guests who were prominent in the social circle of the capital, including a few early adherents of the Baha'i Faith, all of whom were white. Just prior to this luncheon, Abdu'l-Baha had delivered a lecture to hundreds of African Americans at Howard University, which was at that time the most eminent of our nation's historically black colleges and universities. His host for that lecture had been Mr. Louis G. Gregory, an accomplished African American attorney and also an early adherent of the Baha'i Faith in America. In fact, it had been Mr. Gregory who escorted Abdu'l-Baha from Howard to the luncheon. In line with the racially segregated customs of the time, Mr. Gregory quickly dismissed himself after delivering Abdu'l-Baha to the door. Yet, upon encountering the racially segregated scene, the all-white luncheon guests, Abdu'l-Baha was moved to action. Before he would be seated at the luncheon, he called out to those assembled, "Where is Mr. Gregory? Bring Mr. Gregory." The host then scrambled to find Mr. Gregory and bring him in. But not to stop there, Abdu'l-Baha insisted that Mr. Gregory be seated in the place of honor on his right, and the host scrambled again to add a chair and a place setting to the table. In his own small yet significant way, Abdu'l-Baha had, by his own example, demonstrated that the principle of the oneness of humankind could in no wise tolerate the idea of racial division or racial exclusion. It was from such a spirit that the race amity tradition was born in this country. There are many more such stories about Abdu'l-Baha bucking the tradition of racial division, segregation, and inequality while on his North American tour, as well as later. One of his most important acts was to encourage another early Baha'i, Mrs. Alice Parsons, a white woman of considerable social prominence, to convene a national race amity gathering. In 1920, he told her, quote, "I want you to arrange in Washington a convention for unity between the white and colored people," unquote. It was not without difficulty on her part, as she had to overcome not only her own feelings of unfamiliarity with African Americans, but also her concerns about what her equally prominent and influential friends would think in order to carry out this task. In other words, she had to stretch herself. She invited two African American collaborators, one, Mr. Gregory, and the other, Dr. Alan Locke, a Harvard-trained African American philosopher of some note who taught at Howard University, to work with her. Together, they planned the meeting. So it was that in May of 1921, a large two-day meeting was held at the Old First Congregational Church in Washington, D.C., a church known for its opposition to racial prejudice. It was called the Convention for Amity Between the Colored and White Races, based on heavenly teachings. The church, which had the capacity of 2,000 people, was filled to the rafters with black and white people from around the country, although most were from Washington, D.C. Like today's event, it was interreligious, welcoming people from diverse faiths. Most were Christian and Baha'i. We also know that at least 3 African Americans from Boston, Mabry and Sadie Oglesby and their daughter Bertha, attended the event and brought the messages of race amity and the oneness of humankind back to the Boston area. As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of that momentous event this year, we can look back and reflect on 100 years of race relations in the United States. For me, this history isn't just academic. It's the history of my family, starting with my parents. My father was a white farm boy from Wisconsin who had never even seen a black person until he got to college. My mother was a black inner-city girl who grew up in Atlanta, raised by a mother and grandmother who were both domestic servants. Both of them were exposed to the ideas of the oneness of humankind and race amity by Baha'i friends in college. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where my father attended, it was a friend from Japan who shared these ideas. For my mother, at the historically black Spelman College in Atlanta, it was friends from Kenya who shared these ideas. This was in the early 1960s, the heart of the civil rights era, when the messages of racial division and violence were swirling all around them. And yet, their hearts were animated by this message of love and friendship, of harmony, unity, and peace. They saw that there could and should be another way. Both embraced the Baha'i teachings and later met at a Baha'i gathering. When they married in 1962, interracial marriage was legal in only 7 states. They ultimately married in Chicago, in one of the states where it was legal, at the beautiful Baha'i temple on the shores of Lake Michigan. Their journey required, as per Baha'i law, that they obtain consent for their union from both sets of parents. After intense family discussions and the surprise that comes from watching one's family expand beyond one's ancestral ethnic group, they married and formed a family. I was born in February 1965, 2 days after the assassination of Malcolm X, 2 weeks before the March on Selma, and halfway between the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I say all this to demonstrate that what the racial climate was like when I entered the world. To show up racially blended as a biracial child in that world was an act of defiance of the racial order of segregation that still predominated. My parents were brave, both to marry and to bring me into that world. In fact, 2 months after I was born, they were featured in Amity magazine, America's leading magazine for African Americans, in an article about the Baha'i Faith and its message of unity. The tagline read, "World's newest religion stresses brotherhood and peace." Despite the hardships they encountered as a couple and that we encountered as a family, at every turn, their choice made it possible for humanity to advance in conscious awareness of its unity. And my personal sense of mission to continue fostering racial friendship, unity, and justice was awakened by growing up in the Baha'i Faith, particularly during the 1960s and 70s in the Deep South, when fostering interracial community was something we were all working on. There's an incident I will never forget from my childhood. It was my second day of 4th grade. The little girl who sat in front of me turned around and said, "My parents said you never should have been born." She was, of course, referring to the fact that I was biracial, that my parents had crossed the color line to marry, and that from her family's perspective, my family wasn't okay. It was a hurtful moment, and I'll be honest, it made 4th grade hard. But it was my faith and some still small voice within me that kept me somehow safely knowing that I was okay, that my family was good, and that one day all the world would accept all of us. We still aren't there yet, but my, have we come a long way. Biracial kids born today grow up in a completely different world than I did, and young people of different racial and ethnic groups who fall in love have a much easier time than my parents did. That doesn't change the fact, however, that far too many people are still in danger every day because of the hate that we let live in our communities. Is that really what we want? Over the course of my life and career as a professor of Africana Studies, as well as a psychologist whose research focused on the development of social identities, I've thought a lot about what causes people to become who they are, what facilitates our growth towards unity or division, and what causes human beings to flourish as individuals and in community, as well as what hinders or inhibits our movement towards a peaceful, harmonious society. I've thought a lot about what we can do to make our communities more likely to foster everyone's well-being simultaneously, and less likely to allow feelings of hate and discord to take root. It really all starts with attention to one another's well-being and genuine concern for one another. The heart is all important. Do we offer the spirit of friendship, of kindliness to others, regardless of who they are? Baha'u'llah says it succinctly: the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. What a simple formula. When we offer an open heart to those around us, offer the spirit of care and concern, offer help when needed, show up with a spirit of curiosity about difference, and cultivate the non-defensiveness necessary not to become offended easily by things people say and do when they are trying to do the right thing but are still learning, we make progress quickly and we build strong, resilient, welcoming communities, or as we like to say in the Baha'i Faith, communities that are just, diverse, and united. This vision is not out of reach. It does not require elaborate training or having read a ton of books or some specialized vocabulary. It does require a humble posture of learning, a commitment to the essential nobility of all people, and for each of us, regardless of our faith tradition or no faith tradition, to do all of the good things our tradition or ethical system tells us to do. If we bring ourselves to account each day and ask ourselves, what can I do better tomorrow, and then actually strive, our lives can become, as Abdu'l-Baha once said, beautiful prayers. In fact, the full quote is this: Strive that your actions day by day may be beautiful prayers. Turn towards God and seek always to do that which is right and noble. Enrich the poor, raise the fallen, comfort the sorrowful, bring healing to the sick, reassure the fearful, rescue the oppressed, bring hope to the hopeless, shelter the destitute. He also said, God, who sees all hearts, knows how far our lives are the fulfillment of our words. All of our faiths and all of our traditions have sound recommendations just like this one. All of them ultimately point us towards basic human goodness, which in turn moves us in the direction of racial amity, harmony, unity, and justice, and then onward to the recognition that we are fundamentally one human family. It is in these small steps every day and constantly encouraging each other that we get there. To be clear, this is not all that we need to do, but it is something we all can do. So this is my message on this Race Amity Day. I'd like to close with one last quote from Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah wrote, "Let your vision be world-embracing, rather than confined to your own self. The evil one is he that hindereth the rise and obstructeth the spiritual progress of the children of men. It is incumbent upon every man in this day to hold fast unto whatsoever will promote the interests and exalt the station of all nations and just governments. Through each and every one of the verses which the pen of the Most High hath revealed, the doors of love and unity have been unlocked and flung open to the face of men. We have erewhile declared, and our word is the truth, consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. Whatsoever hath led the children of men to shun one another, and hath caused dissensions and divisions amongst them, hath, through the revelation of these words, been nullified and abolished. From the heaven of God's will, and for the purpose of ennobling the world of being, and of elevating the minds and souls of men, hath been sent down that which is the most effective instrument for the education of the whole human race." Thank you.
I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful two singers together.
I know.
They're out of control. We would like to invite members of several faiths across Metro West who will offer heartfelt prayers and reflections in their own traditions. In between each prayer shared, we will pause briefly for a moment of silence. Elise Pincus Abramson, rabbinical student at Hebrew College, Jewish. Natick.
Hi, good evening. My name is Elise, and I'm a rabbinical student at Hebrew College in Newton. One fundamental teaching in the Torah is to welcome the stranger. In Exodus 23:9, it says, "V'ger lo tilchatz, v'atem yadatem et nefesh hager ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim." You shall not oppress a stranger, since you yourself know the feelings of a stranger, for you also were strangers in the land of Egypt. We are instructed to have an open heart and to have empathy for the other, because we know what it is like to feel oppressed. This theme gets mentioned again and again throughout the liturgy as a constant reminder, and it feels important and appropriate to hear these words on Race Amity Day, a day where we are encouraged to open our hearts across racial barriers and welcome each other in. There is another verse in Ecclesiastes that feels appropriate to mention today as well. This is from Ecclesiastes 4:9 through 10. Tovim hashanayim min ha'echad, asher yesh lachem sacharto ba'amalam. Ki im yipolu ha'echad yakim et chavero, ve'ilo ha'echad sheyipol ve'ein shani lahakimo. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falls, for he has not another to help him up. While it's important to welcome the stranger, I think it's important to go one step further to be an ally in action. We are not able to do this work alone. It takes two to make a change. My blessing is that we hold these words to heart. May we always have empathy and compassion for the stranger, and may we create and build relationships across racial lines through support and friendship. Thank you.
Our next prayer shepherd will be Bhakta Muralidhar, Hindu framing.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on this important event, and thanks to Daniel and Alfine for including me. I appreciate that. I will share a prayer from the Hindu scripture called the Bhagavad Gita, which means the song of the God, God's song. It is in Sanskrit. I will explain the meaning in English. Yada bodha pragat bhavam ekastam manupashyati tadayeva cha vistaram brahma sampadyate tatha. Before I explain the meaning, I want to use a metaphor to try to illustrate or capture the essence of the verse. Consider clay pots, 100 clay pots in front of you, of different shapes, sizes, forms, and colors. You know that they are all rooted in the same substratum, the clay, which is attributeless, right? Accordingly, they arise from the clay to take on different shapes and forms, and they return to clay when you break them. The pot ceases to exist, but the clay returns, clay exists, right? That's pretty much what the verse is saying. that diversity and plurality of humans, animals, and forms. When I say diversity, I mean caste, yes, I'm from India, color, race, ethnicity, even sexual orientation. They all arise from the same and rooted in the same source, the God of the cosmos. Accordingly, they arise from the God of the cosmos, and when they cease to exist, return to the God of the cosmos. The verse goes on to say, one that recognizes this unity in the diversity knows the absolute truth. In spiritual terms, he has attained enlightenment. Right? So I close with the prayer and thought that we all will be bestowed with the wisdom to see past the diversity into the unity rooted in the God of the cosmos. Thank you.
Our next prayer shepherd will be Sarah Kokowski, First Parish, Lincoln Unitarian Universalism, and the United Church of Christ.
Good evening. Would you join me in a spirit of prayer as you feel so moved? Spirit of life and love, creator, liberator, and sustainer, we who are gathered here reflect your expansiveness in our diversity, our journeys, our struggles. We bring those multitudes together and lay them down in this, our shared sacred space. We bring our gratitude for the ways you have brought us through, for the markers and signposts of liberation along the way to freedom, for the mountaintop moments when we see love being lived out in our midst as we do here tonight. And yet we bring our grief, our pain, our varied and interwoven struggles from living in a society still steeped in racism and colonization, patriarchy and homophobia, and many more injustices that deny human dignity. We are so far from where we hope to be. We ask for strength and endurance, for we know, as Audre Lorde told us, revolution is not a one-time event. The task of building a world of equity and justice to which we have all been called will not be accomplished in our lifetimes. And still we press on, knowing the work we do today is not in vain, but that your Spirit will be faithful to sustain us in the challenges that remain ahead. We ask, too, for clear minds and humble spirits. Let us understand the role that we each individually have to play, and let us humbly seek the well-being of those who have been most harmed, most marginalized, ahead of the preservation of our own egos, our own desire to be right. Let us instead do what is right, knowing we will stumble along the path, but that we must stay in this fight regardless, because our own freedom and flourishing is bound up together with one another, and because of that, we are not alone. We gather tonight to recommit to this journey of justice through relationship, through meaningful solidarity. May the powers and principalities of white supremacy be dismantled, and may all those who hunger and thirst for justice be filled. We ask this in the name of all that is love. Amen.
Next prayer shepherd, Sal Bande, Islamic Center of Boston in Wayland, Natick.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. As Muslims, we are reminded in the Quran that we're all God's creation. We all have the same ancestor. We're all equal. No no one is superior to another except in devotion to God, and that we must embrace our cultural differences so we can get to know each other. Social justice is a crucial pillar to the Islamic faith. Giving charity is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. In addition, it promotes love, peace, brotherhood, rights, and prosperity for all humans, regardless of their race, religion, or any other discrimination. There are 5 elements of social justice: equitable distribution of wealth, provision of social security, and protection of the weak against the strong. The Quran says, "O you who believe, be steadfast in the cause of God, bearing witness in equity, and don't let the hostility of people incite you to act otherwise than with justice. Be always just, that is nearer to righteousness, and fear God. Surely God is aware of what you do." Please join me in a short prayer. In the name of God, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, Master of the day of judgment. It is you we worship, and you we ask for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those upon whom you have bestowed your favor, not of those who have earned your anger, or of those who are astray. Ameen. Thank you, and God bless America.
Our next prayer shepherd, Leili Mapayan, Baha'i Framing.
In the corpus of prayers revealed by Baha'u'llah, the Bab, his forerunner, and Abdu'l-Baha, there are prayers for many different occasions. But during his travels to North America, Abdu'l-Baha composed a special prayer for the United States, and that's the prayer, we call it the Prayer for America. O thou kind Lord, this gathering is turning to thee. These hearts are radiant with thy love. These minds and spirits are exhilarated by the message of thy glad tidings. O God, let this American democracy become glorious in spiritual degrees, even as it has aspired to material degrees, and render this just government victorious. Confirm this revered nation to upraise the standard of the oneness of humanity, to promulgate the most great peace, to become thereby most glorious and praiseworthy among all the nations of the world. O God, this American nation is worthy of thy favors and is deserving of thy mercy. Make it precious and near to thee through thy bounty and bestowal.
Our next prayer shepherd, Father Brian Hare, St. John the Evangelist, Wellesley.
In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus speaks to the disciples and says, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." That's an invitation to each and every believer that we seek to grow into the mind of God, that we would see the world as God sees it, the world that God has created. In that spirit, I try to call down God's blessing this night on this gathering. May the God who is truth fill our minds, our hearts, our commonwealth, and our country with wisdom. May the God who is justice fill our minds, our hearts, our commonwealth, and our country, with the conviction to honor the sacred dignity of every person created in the image of God. May the God who is love fill our minds, our hearts, our commonwealth, and our country with the power of God's love, which can bind us together, heal injustice, and grant us peace. And may the God who is peace fill our minds, our hearts, our commonwealth, and our country with his sacred peace. Amen.
Thank you so much for each of your powerful, spiritual, and meaningful words. Sharing your traditions with us tonight with the hope of race amity, keeping it alive in each of us. We now invite Reverend Lloyd to lead us in a closing prayer, followed by Let There Be Peace on Earth, sung by everyone.
In the early church, the benediction of the blessing was given. Folk were invited to look up, not to look down. They were invited to raise their hand as if you could touch the person in front of you, or the person who was leading in the blessing. I invite you to do the same tonight. So now go from this place, knowing full well that indeed the image of God is upon you and upon others. Go from this place that you might not only make peace, but be peace. Go from this place that yes, indeed, you might be in relationship that is based not on ignorance, but on understanding. And go from this place, in the words of John Lewis, get into good trouble. And in doing so, shalom.
Thank you, prayer shepherds. Thank you, Mara. Thank you, musicians, for being here. Reverend Lloyd, thank you. Dr. Matthias, thank you for sharing your words, your heartfelt prayers with us today. And more importantly, thank you for being here. My heart is so full of joy and love right now. but we want to make sure we know that you were here. So make sure you register at the tables there, or is it just there, the table, or there, or over there. So we know that you will be here. May this be the start of something wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ron.